Okay, why don't we get started? So, welcome everybody, and obviously feel free to continue to trickle in. We welcome everybody who's joining in now, but this is the third iteration of the Mastering the Neonatal Perinatal Medicine Fellowship Application Series, sponsored by the TCAN group, so the Trainees and Early Career Neonatologists group housed within the AAP, as well as the ONTPD, the NPM Training Program Directors group. And I am Makela. I'm going to be one of the moderators today, and we'll get into our introductions in the next slide. All right, so as I said, my name is Makela Neal-Canton. I'm one of the second year residents right now at the University of Michigan, and I'll let Lan and then Lauren introduce themselves now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lan Zhang. I'm also a second year resident at Children's Hospital of Montefiore.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren. I'm a second year medical student at Jacobs School of Medicine in Buffalo. So I have a few more steps to go.
And we've gathered as moderators through the new TCAN medical student and resident group. And so we're really happy to be able to help Dr. French and the rest of TCAN and ONTPD continue to put these webinars on. So Lon, you want to take it away?
Sure. So just a quick outline of tonight's panel. So we have three moderators will prompt the panelists to answer questions that we selected from the poll survey. And if any of the participants have any other additional questions, feel free to put in the chat box. And then the panelists will address those questions when they're able to. And if the time allows, we will try to address the remaining questions in the end.
All right, so I wanted to bring Dr. Heather French on for this next piece of the webinar to discuss the application timeline as a whole, as well as any new adjustments to the ERS application that are pertinent to know.
Great, thanks. I'm Heather French. I'm the fellowship program director at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and we're so glad you could join us tonight. So just a brief kind of overview of the application timeline for those of you who are applying in this upcoming cycle. So you'll be able to get your EFDO token on June 8th, and then you can begin submitting your ERAS applications on July 5th. I would strongly encourage you all to try to get your applications in very soon after that deadline, or not the deadline, sorry, but when the mailbox opens for you. Right now, if you are applying, you should be thinking about who you would like to write your letters of recommendation, and really encourage your letter writers to have those letters close to complete by the time that the mailbox opens on July 5th. July 28th is the deadline to get your applications in. But I would recommend that you try to get your applications in by July 15th, because July 15th is when fellowship program directors have access to the mailbox, to their ERAS mailbox, and they will start reviewing applications on July 15th. And so some programs will have rolling interviews. And so you want to make sure that you get your application in early, so that way you're in that first wave if it is a program that offers rolling interviews. You can start putting in information about your rank list beginning in September, at the end of September, and this is once you've been offered interviews and potentially have interviewed at programs, and then you'll be able to start kind of thinking through your rank list and putting that into the computer. But you don't have to certify that rank list until November 15th. And then match day this year is November 29th. So probably none of you are aware, but this is a much more condensed cycle for us. Match day used to be in the middle of December, and we used to be able to get access to the mailbox a little bit sooner. So the whole cycle is compressed for neonatology and all pediatric subspecialties now. And so really, really, really strongly encourage you guys to have your applications in very early, by July 15th if you can. Next slide. So there are many components to the application. There are things that, the logistics that you all will be responsible for. And again, that's, identifying your letter writers and getting them the information that they need to write your letters of recommendation. You'll be writing a personal statement. You'll be filling out the ERAS application, which you can think of sort of like your CV. You'll need to request that your USMLE transcripts and your medical school transcripts get sent to ERAS along with, a medical student performance evaluation or that dean's letter that was written for you when you were applying for residency. All of you will submit a photograph, although I will say most programs are no longer using a photograph as part of their screening process, just to try to kind of, prevent bias. And then for any of you that are international medical graduates, you'll have to submit your ECFMG status report. Next slide. So your personal statement, I think a lot of people have questions about what should go into your personal statement, and hopefully our panelists can kind of expand on this. But the best way to think about your personal statement is that your CV is a look backwards at what you've accomplished already. So your personal statement, think of it as it's serving as a bridge between what you've done and what you hope to accomplish. So don't use the personal statement to regurgitate your CV. That's already done. We can read your ERAS application, but really use that personal statement to let us get to know you. Let us find out what is motivating you. What are your passions and what drives you? And what are you looking for in a career? It's usually 3 to 4 paragraphs in length, and you want to make sure that you've had it proofread again and again and again. I can't tell you how annoying it can be when we get personal statements that don't have excellent grammar and spelling. So really, really, really have many people proofread your personal statements for you. Next slide. I think a lot of people struggle with even where to begin with a personal statement. So this was a paper that was published a year ago in the Journal of Graduate Medical Education. And I think it's a nice place for you all to start. So hopefully you guys can take a quick screenshot of this or jot down the citation. But it is a nice thing to just read to prime yourself as you are thinking about how to write a compelling personal statement. And I can throw this citation in the chat as well. Next slide. And then your letters of recommendation. All of you should have 3 letters of recommendation. And if you are someone who's done significant research or has a PhD, you want a 4th letter as well from your research mentor. But your 3 letters in total, 1 will be coming from your residency program director. 1, you definitely need a letter of recommendation from a neonatologist. If you don't have one, that's a red flag. And then a 3rd letter from someone else that you feel like knows you well and can really speak to your humanity and your personal qualities. So be thoughtful about who you select, and I'm sure our panelists will have some really good wisdom for you all. And I think that's done for me. I'm done. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I have the most important slide. So there are some changes to ERAS this year, and these changes are new for all of us. They're new to you, and they're new to all the program directors. You may have heard about these changes, and so this is what we understand as a community, what they will be. So all of you will have the opportunity to have geographic signaling, which means that you can optionally share if a program that you're applying to is in an area of geographic preference for you. And you can select 3 different regions that you can signal geographic preferences for. You can also say that you don't have a preference, no preference whatsoever. If you are submitting an application to a program and it's in a geographic area you prefer, that program will know about it. If you're applying to program Y, which is in a program that is not in a region that you have selected as a geographic preference, they just won't see anything. They won't see that you didn't select it as an area. but they also won't be able to tell, that you didn't have a preference for that area either. So we don't really know how this is all going to work out. I think, it's possible that many programs could use it as a way to help them sort through very similar candidates on paper in terms of who to offer interview spots to. But I'm curious to hear what the other program directors are thinking, how they're going to manage this particular situation. Also new to the ERS application is that in your CV or in the application, you can only list 10 meaningful experiences. So no longer can your CV be, lines and lines and lines about volunteering here, volunteering there, doing this research, et cetera. You have to kind of distill down your CV to 10 experiences that you feel like represent you best. And then within those 10 experiences, you can designate and describe up to 3 experiences that you identify as the most meaningful to you with a short description. So be thoughtful about what those 3 meaningful experiences say about you and what you hope to communicate to program directors. And then lastly, there's an optional area that you can describe, if it is pertinent to you, impactful experiences. And this is a place where a candidate can describe challenges or hardships that influence their journey into residency, whether that has to do something with a disadvantaged background, either familial or financial. If you grew up in a disadvantaged community, challenging educational experiences or general life experiences. So this is really meant for the candidate that this truly applies to. It's an optional paragraph. So if this doesn't apply to you, don't feel like you have to put something down. I think program directors are looking for authenticity here. And so if a candidate were to try to take something that maybe doesn't really convey hardship and write about it in this area, that might not look great. So be really careful and thoughtful about what you put here. Okay, I think that is now the last slide for me.
Alrighty, I want to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter did her residency at Stanford, and then she pursued her fellowship at Oregon Health and Science University. She stayed as a program director there, and OHSU has 2 positions open for NICU fellowship for first years. And Dr. Carter's academic interests include neonatal epidemiology, health disparities, and improving equity in the medical learning environment. Welcome, Dr. Carter.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Next, we have Dr. Bonacere. She did her residency and fellowship at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and she is a program director there too. Their program has 4 positions open for first-year fellows, and Dr. Bonacere's academic interests include workforce equity, neonatal nephrology, and physician personal finance. Welcome.
Hi, all. Glad to be here. Hope we have some very exciting questions.
Okay, our third panelist is Dr. Greenberg. She completed her residency and fellowship at Duke University Medical Center, where she stayed and is now the program director there. Duke University has 3 first-year fellowship positions, and some of her academic interests include clinical trials in neonatal epidemiology studies. Welcome, Dr. Greenberg.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our next panelist is Dr. Young. Dr. Young completed her residency and fellowship at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and she is now the program director at the University of Miami Holtz Children's Hospital. This program has 3 to 4 first-year fellowship positions, and her academic interests include cellular and molecular mechanisms underlying endothelial dysfunction and bronchopulmonary dysplasia. Welcome, Dr. Young.
Happy to be here, thanks.
And our final panelist of the evening is Dr. Traskey. She completed her residency and fellowship at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, and she is currently the program director at University of Connecticut School of Medicine, Connecticut Children's Hospital. There are 2 first-year fellowship positions at this program, and some of her academic interests include medical education research, and mentoring fellows in their scholarly projects. Welcome, Dr. Traskey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so we'll start the question portion of the webinar session tonight. So I'll ask Doctors Carter and Young to field this question. So what do you most look for in a personal statement, and how should or does it differ from that of a residency personal statement?
I don't know if you want me to start, Dr. Young, but I think Dr. French put it very nicely, which is really that this is the explaining your past as it connects to your future, and really giving the reader a vision of how you see your career developing as a neonatologist. And we all know that you don't know for sure, but sort of tying together those experiences, it's your opportunity to highlight the things that are especially important to you and to bring light to areas that you want us to focus on in your application, and where you fit into our program or a program in neonatology. And so we really, I think the one thing that I always tell my mentees is that anything you put in your personal statement, you should be ready to talk about. And you shouldn't put things in your application at all that you don't want to talk about. And we see a lot of very, especially in neonatology, people who've become parents and been parents in the NICU and those sorts of experiences, and that's great. And it does give you a unique experience about neonatology, but you just have to be willing to have those discussions in your interview.
Agree with Dr. Carter. It's interesting. We've been looking at personal statements, myself and my associate director, and she calls some personal statements generic. And I asked her, why did she call them generic? And she says, well, if I only hear, okay, well, I decided to choose neonatology because I had a baby who had hypoplastic left heart, and that was the experience. And I went in there and that was delivery, and that's it. I decided. We call that generic. So what we'd like to see is we want to get to know you. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What kind of program are you looking for? Where do you see yourself in the future? And as Dr. Carter said, what experiences you've had that may shape you and has made you decide that this is a career path that you want to take, right? But within that, if you've had something unique happen, right? You know, whether or not it's some familial thing that happened, it's okay, you can put that in. But the generic, oh, I had this patient who had that, everybody puts it. And so you sound like everybody else. So tell us who you are so we can get to know you without seeing you. That's the first time we get to meet you. Hope we answered that one. Okay.
Thank you so much. I definitely have learned a lot from those answers. Next question, we want to ask Dr. Tresky and Dr. Greenberg. Can you provide some guidance on how to choose letter writers, and what do you specifically look for within the letter of recommendations?
Do you want me to start? Okay, awesome. So I think that Dr. French spoke a little bit about some of this earlier, and I agree wholeheartedly with what she had said. I think that the advice I give a lot of my mentees is to choose people who know you, people who can attest to who you are and who you are as a person, who can write about what makes you special as a physician, as a person, as a teacher. I've had some mentees who have had spectacular rotations and came up to me and said, oh, I got a commendation, but it was in my hospital medicine rotation. Is that okay to submit, or ask them to submit a letter on my behalf? I said, absolutely, because that's potentially a key testament to who you are as a physician and what you can do. So as Dr. French had indicated, you'll have your, program director letter of reference. Certainly you want a letter from a neo, and then someone who knows you, who doesn't necessarily need to be a neonatologist. What I look for in a letter is a little bit about someone who can talk a little bit about the medical skills that you have, your medical knowledge base, but also things that stand out to me are statements about your interpersonal communication skills, how you relate with the team that you work with, how you support other trainees, your teaching skills. Do you stand out as a teacher for medical students or other residents? And then, specifically, if you have been involved in research and have a research mentor writing you a letter, make sure that they can speak to your project involvement, what you did with the project, how invested you were in the project. These are all important things to show, I guess, how you can differentiate yourself from other candidates. And we actually did a session like this with our residents at UConn and Connecticut Children's recently. And so it was all of our program directors from all different subspecialties. And I think one thing that we all kind of agreed on and talked a little bit about was, don't feel that you need to go and get a letter of recommendation from the well-known person in neonatology, just because maybe you have, that amazing researcher or that person who's so well known. Don't feel like you have to go to them and get a very generic letter just because they're a well-known name. I personally look for the letters where people can write more in-depth description of who you are, people who know you, than the person who just can write a very generic letter. It comes down to, like, Dr. Young was saying, that generic personal statement, there's a difference between that generic, mediocre letter of reference from someone who doesn't necessarily know you well, but maybe a name in neonatology, and the people who can really, truly speak to you as an amazing individual. And I think those letters stand more on their own than necessarily the generic letters. So those are a few things that I look for. I don't know if Dr. Greenberg has any other pearls.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. I thought that was really a nice summary of a lot of what I'm looking for as well when I look at letters. I will firmly second that, like choosing someone who knows you well. I think it can be really challenging, though, in general, to choose letter writers, because some people are better letter writers than others, and you don't know who they are as a trainee. And when we see them, we can tell some people are just kind of know the things that are helpful, and some people don't. And that is, so I think the best that you can do is give your letter writer the tools that they can use to write your letter. So, whether that's, if you've worked with someone on clinical service, making that extra effort to meet with them outside of clinical service, maybe not just because it may be because you want them to write you a letter, but also to talk to them about being a neonatologist, or talking to them about their path and their specialty, and seeing how they interact with you, the questions they ask you, and giving them the information that you would like to make sure is fresh in their mind as they're writing your letter. As a person who writes letters, sometimes it's helpful to have those things to think back on, those conversations. The other thing to think about is, it's definitely, I will reiterate, asking your letter writers as early as you can to write your letters, because it can be, when the application's open and the letters aren't in, it's not a disaster. We know that they're coming, but that first screening process, sometimes when you're looking at letters, we will go back and look to see if things are updated, but it is good to have, I think, more of those in place earlier. I think that just helps you and helps round out your application, and shows that it's all together. And so just I'm just trying to think of the things that you can do as an applicant to make those letters actually work in your favor. And yeah, when I'm looking at letters, I really am looking to see someone who knows the individual and can speak to their qualities, can speak to examples, and also if they happen to know their what they want for the future. It's important to be honest and transparent to your letter writers as well. If sometimes occasionally there will be a letter that seems to indicate a person wants to do a certain thing, whereas the personal statement will say the person wants to do another thing, which is okay. Things change all the time, but sometimes that is, if you can let your letter writers know sort of what truly you are interested in, so that they can speak to that would be, I think that's ideal.
Thank you, Dr. Greenberg and Dr. Traske.
Sure. One other thing, just quickly, don't be afraid to ask your letter writers if they feel they can write you a good letter. Give them the option to say, I only worked with you for 1 or 2 weeks. I'm not sure, I got to know you very well. Ask them to be honest with you. This is your career. This is your future. So that can potentially help you tease out some of the people who are, definitely willing to support you and, help you with your application.
Thank you both for that. Our next question is for Dr. Bonacere and Dr. Carter. And the question is, if an applicant doesn't have very many extracurricular activities, such as leadership and research, what advice do you have to stand out on a virtual interview or application?
Do you want to go first, or?
Sure, everyone's too polite. We're having a standoff here. You go. No, I'll take this one first, and then next time we're duoing, you can go first.
Okay, sounds good.
So I really, really want to make sure we're focusing on quality and not quantity, right? So don't feel like you have to cram something into every single box because there's 10 spots that you have to have 10 things, because you might have 4 that are extremely rich. Another candidate might put 10 things on there that they barely skim the surface of. So it's much more important that you use both in your ERAS application and then in your interview time, every character possible to use as powerful a communication as to what that activity provided to you, what you provided to that activity, and how it informs your next steps. Okay, so think about really powerful language. If you founded a program, if you directed a program, use that type of language. Obviously, don't make it up if you did not. But really think about how you draw a straight line. Everything in the personal statement of the interview is draw a straight line from something you've done to where you head next. Okay, so this is why I want to pursue this type of research and fellowship. This experience was super meaningful to me in resident. It's really important that in fellowship, I'm going to have an opportunity to engage in my resident diversity inclusion coalition, something like that, right? So how do you connect those experiences, no matter how many there are, to the type of fellow you're going to be? So program director is visualizing, this is how this person would fit into my program. And I use the word fit very carefully. So I want to be clear. I don't mean will look like all my other fellows, right? But will complement the entire culture of my program. And do I have the resources to serve this fellow? Because I'd like to think that every PD is very, very much your champion. And if you're not going to be well served in my program, then I'm not going to try to convince you to come to my program.
Yeah, I think that was really well said by Dr. Bonacere. I had taken some notes, and I really think on these questions, and I really think your vision or your story is what you want to come through in all of these pieces. And you have, a few things that you have complete control over, and that's your personal statement and your CV and your interview. And then I think the other piece that is, once you get to the point of your interview, you've made it through a lot of screening. So just remember that. And the interview is really as much your time to figure out the kinds of things like, can this program support me? Will they support me in the way that I need to be supported to be successful in my career? And when we have fellow applicants that are asking us questions about programs that we didn't even know existed in the university that are off in some corner, that's not a bad thing. We love that, because then we go searching to connect them with the, one researcher in this narrow area to try to make that connection for them. And for us, that shows that you're invested in our program and interested in our program. And it also gives you an opportunity to see how they react to your interests, as in both ways. So I think that really, again, knowing what your vision is, for, at least generally, for your career, and having some interest that you can bring to the table in the interview and the personal statement that tells your story is what's most important. Again, not the number. And I love that they're decreasing the number of activities that you can actually list, because it really makes you take that first stab at kind of what we try to do, which is like draw out what is actually really important that you've been doing, and it gives you control to actually say, these are the important things that I've been doing, not letting us try and decide what we think is important or not important.
All right, so we'll go to the next question then, and this is directed to Dr. Tresky and Dr. Greenberg. What best practices would you recommend for applicants in order to make the most of their virtual interview experience or their interview day?
Do you want to go first this time? Or?
Sure. I'll go first this time. That's fine. So I think a couple of things. I would say reading. I think most people will do this, but reading about the program and learning as much as you can about the program from the website. Reading the materials that are sent ahead of time, so and can ask questions that not only just about the program or something that was unclear, but something that might affect you and your interests as well, is really, I think, will help the interview be efficient, because there's not always a lot of time, and help you get a better sense of how, if the program's a good fit for you, and help the interviewer get the sense of, this person, was thoughtful and is thinking about their future, and what might be a good fit for them. And if the other thing I would suggest is, one of the things that our program does, and I'm sure many do, is ask you if there are people you would like to interview with when you interview, and I would strongly encourage, if you have that, if the program gives you that option, to take advantage of it, because you may not always be able to interview with that person or those people, but it is going to be most meaningful to you if you have a particular interest and you're speaking with someone who you might want to do a scholarly project with, who has had a career path that maybe one that you might want to follow, or has some experience that you would like to hear about, or some role. So I think those would be a couple pieces of advice that I would have. That I'll let Dr. Tresky add on to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said. Yeah, being prepared is key. Doing a little interest or a little homework and on the program is super important. I would say, I see some in the chat, folks, talking about, having your interview space be professional and free of distractions. I would also say, be as comfortable as you possibly can. I'm sitting in a horribly uncomfortable chair right now, and if I had to sit here for 4 hours, it would be painful. So, make sure that in your interview spot, in addition to, having it be, professional, be comfortable, because you're going to be there for a while. And, you don't want to end up with, an aching back or something like that. And also when you're talking to people, show interest, show genuine interest in the program. As you've heard before, you've already gone through a very significant vetting process. You've gotten to a point where we want you in our program, or we wouldn't have offered you an interview. And we want to see you express interest in our program, to be excited, about us as well. So yeah, be interesting, show interest in when you're there. So.
And as Dr. French alluded to in the chat, this question was a little sneak peek to the interview focused webinar that we'll have hopefully in a couple of weeks, but glad that we were able to kind of initiate the conversation today, and then we'll move on to the rest of the questions for tonight being more application focused.
Next question, we want to ask Dr. Young and Dr. Carter, what are some types of experiences that you view as valuable in an application? And if you have any examples that you want to share with us, Dr. Young, if you want to go first.
Yes, so I am a bit partial to research. However, you may not want to be a researcher. If you have done research, whether in your undergraduate life, or during residency, highlight it and tell us how this could help to frame your fellowship. If you have done a master's, yes, tell us how that could help you in your fellowship and beyond. If you've been involved in advocacy in residency, important, because you may decide that that's the path you want to take during fellowship. If you have done global health and you have, done mission trips, and you determine this is a path you want to take, great. You should highlight all those things to us in your application. I think for us, what we do when we review applications, we really take this holistic view of it. We know everyone won't want to be academicians, right? We know everyone won't want to be basic science researchers, but tell us so we can get a feel for who you are and whether or not you will fit in. So these little snippets of experiences will help to shape our minds as we review your application. I'll stop so Emily can fit in and then I can chime in further.
I totally agree. I feel like I've been saying, if we all have been saying this over and over again, is to really let the application focus on who you are. And I think the reason that is true is the applications that really stand out to us are the ones where you start to feel the person come through the paper, which is very challenging to do. And I think takes a lot of people reading your application. I don't think anyone does that just spontaneously on their own. So starting this early and talking through the things that have made you passionate about what you do, so that you can start to have those conversations before you even start writing, I think is helpful in your personal statement. And also highlighting those experiences. I do think, we'll see how it works out. We have not used this new way of doing ERAS and highlighting experiences, but I actually think it will be really helpful for all of you and helpful for us in really knowing what experiences are most important to you and not taking up space in your personal statement to have to really explain a lot of those.
Okay, our next question is for Dr. Barnard Chair and Dr. Trasky. What are the most important factors in identifying a strong applicant?
So I guess by saying it's totally contextual, right? I hope that every single program has crafted a beautiful holistic review algorithm, because I've given lots of webinars on this to our program directors, that starts with their strategic vision and mission, right? What I am recruiting for at Nationwide Children's, knowing the resources that I have and the goals of my program, is not going to be the same exact thing that Dr. Tresky is recruiting for. So we are trying to align applicants with our program vision. And again, like I said earlier, I'm not into trying to convince somebody to come to my program if I think there's a better place for them. At the very outset of the webinar, Dr. French was talking about how we all really do like and care about each other. And that's it. We are a community, right? You are all going to be our peers, our partners, and we want you to be as successful and happy as humanly possible. So my particular factors are going to look different from other folks. But I think there's some common threads, right? Our field really depends on excellent communication. It requires terrific leadership skills, one of the most important of which is developing a collaborative environment, or making sure everyone on the team, because we work in such wonderful, rich, multidisciplinary environments, is able to have their opinions heard and weighed and be part of the group decision, since we're all working for the same thing, right? The best case outcome for our patients. So I think those are common threads that pretty much every program is excited to see. But there are going to be places that really heavily weigh your research. There are going to be places that are great advocacy centers, and all of those experiences will be weighed differently.
Sure. I mean, things that I look for, I really try to look for the well-rounded applicant. So, in trying to keep things fair and equitable, I've tried to design, a standardized scoring system in a way for when I review the applications, and everybody kind of starts with a blank slate. And yeah, sure, there are things that, that you kind of gain points as you go along. And there are certainly things that, stand out. Research, presentations, but a lot of it is your past experiences. What are things that have helped you stand out as a leader? Have you done a chief resident year? Have you had a year or two of work as an attending physician outside of neonatology? How have you worked with the team in that capacity? And really, coming back to those letters, it's really key to, sometimes those are what speak to your capacity as a communicator, how you relate to other people. So I do look, you spend a fair amount of time looking at the letters for those important key components. So those are definitely some things that we look for.
All right, so this next question we'll direct towards Dr. Carter and Dr. Greenberg. We'll do Dr. Carter first and then Dr. Greenberg to answer. And the question is, what are some common pitfalls within the fellowship application that should be avoided?
There are some, I think, red flags or pitfalls that happen more commonly or less commonly. I think one was already mentioned, but I'll reiterate it, just mistakes that happen in your written application. We try to be recognize that sometimes that's because people don't have the same resources for mentorship that we hope our residents do, but I think that that's a really important and avoidable mistake with getting a lot of people to read your application. And then, we've talked about being yourself and being all the things that we want to get to know you as who you are. But I think that people can cross that line sometimes. This is a professional process of choosing colleagues that are work-based colleagues. And so really being thoughtful about that in how much you share and your sort of the face that you put forward through the application process, but at the same time being authentic in that. And I think if you're worried about crossing that line, again, getting help from people who read applications all the time or pre-interview, I think is helpful in being able to guide, because it's not that those pieces of you shouldn't come through in the application. It's just that they should come through in the right way that supports you. And then I think people feeling you can feel when somebody is disinterested in you through, or your program through the interview process. So planning a virtual interview tucked in between a couple of night shifts or somewhere where you're really tired and not able to really be your energetic self doesn't come across well to the program that you're interviewing for. And I think those are some of the last one I would say is, if you do have something that happened during any part of training that is either you failed the USMLE or you took some time off for whatever reason, whether that's to help a family member or any other reason, just explaining those is so helpful in your application somewhere. Now, I think you're being given multiple places. And so strategically placing that in the right location, I'm not sure exactly what that would be for each of those individual things, but explaining them is really important in your application.
Agree with all of those things. Thanks for starting it out, Dr. Carter. You know, I think I'm trying to think of some other things that I've come across. I think that there are some people who I think are really well-intentioned, but are will try to not. You don't have to show the depth of your neonatology knowledge in your personal statement. Like, you don't spend a paragraph talking about how exciting the physiology of CDH is. It is, and maybe it's okay, you know, it's okay to be wowed by that and excited about that, but you don't have to explain it because we know it. And we want to hear about you. So that could be a pitfall. If you know, the simple mistakes to just make sure you have the right personal statement attached with the application. Some people are apply to multiple specialties, or some programs have a combined fellowship that they're applying to, and if it's if you're talking about that in your personal statement at a program that doesn't offer that, that can be just one of those mistakes that comes through that shows that lack of attention to detail potentially. And then I would say this maybe extends beyond the application to the interview process, but when you're at the interview, be sure to have a reason why you're interested in that program, that you can really talk about, and it be, I think, as other people have said, authentic. If you are interested in global health, but you're interviewing at a program that doesn't have a lot of faculty or that are interested in global health, maybe be aware of that, and maybe talk about why you think that this program is still a great fit because of these other reasons, or you just show that you've put some thought into that. If you are really interested in ECMO, but the program isn't somewhere that trains people in ECMO, is that just be cognizant of those things. You may not know all of that before the interview, and so those are kind of questions that you can ask early on to tease those things out. But just, I think, doing your homework and being prepared, and having a reason. Like, if you truly can't see yourself going to a program, you don't have to interview with that program, because it may not be that useful to you. So just spend your time making the interviews and the application the best for the programs that you really are interested in, I think.
Righty. Our next question will be directed toward Dr. Bonachir and Dr. Young. What is the best way for underrepresented in medicine applicants to determine whether a program offers a safe and supportive environment for applicants to thrive and succeed?
So perhaps I can start. So as an underrepresented minority, as well as a foreign medical graduate, when I did my training, I think it's important to speak to past graduates first of the program or current trainees within the program. They will give you perhaps an unbiased pulse of the program. So that's the first little inkling that you will get. And then the next thing, and it's difficult because what it is that despite best efforts to have a diverse group of trainees and faculty, it's often very difficult for us to recruit depending on your location, right? But it's one thing you can see the makeup of the group if you're trying to get into a diverse setting. The next thing I think is the support, right? And how do you know this? Is a big thing to ask. And I tell you to ask that little meeting that, well, for our program, we put together a meeting with the trainees, the current fellows. And I tell, applicants to ask difficult questions to the trainees as to, how do you feel day to day? Do you feel like going to work every day? Do you feel as if what kind of training do they have in terms of implicit bias? Ask the difficult questions, and in the interview process, ask those difficult questions. Websites can say lots of things. Oh, we have X and X and X, but ask the questions to people who live it and face it every single day. I think for me, that would be one way to do it. We had some other questions, I think, in this regard, in terms of foreign medical graduates who are often underrepresented minorities, and how do they, get into the culture and feel accepted into the program, right? Again, important to speak to your group, important to speak to people who have seen and know these programs to see, whether or not there are support mechanisms there. Ask also, what kind of careers have people who have graduated from that program gone into, so that they can show, some evidence of thriving and succeeding. Ask whether or not trainees have left the program midway, right? Those are good things to ask, to see whether or not, and it goes both ways. It's not just for underrepresented minorities, it goes for every single trainee. What is your retention rate? Do people leave midway? Quite important, right? And I tell you, when you come to the interview, and I liked in person more than virtual, but now I'm getting used to it. What it is that get a pulse, see if people like each other, right? Do they smile when they interact in that group setting where everybody's together, right? It's important. Get a pulse to see, am I in an environment that will allow me to grow and foster my growth? Those things I think are critical. I'm going to pause.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm a queer Latina, so I think there's a different element that I'm happy to dialogue with anybody who is queer and trying to decide to be out in the application or out in the interview process, and how they weigh safety versus understanding if this is going to be an inclusive environment. Happy to talk about that from a slightly different lens. But in general, I think the most important thing, as Dr. Young said, is you have to talk to your own folks in the institution, right? Everybody's got the nice statement. They hopefully have the good social media, but is that talking the talk or walking the walk? So look for URM folks in leadership positions, right? Residency directors, C-suite executives. As the director for all the fellowships for PEDS in my institution, the number one most important metric that I track is retention of fellows into faculty positions. There are tons of reasons why fellows stay or leave, but nobody's going to stay in a toxic environment, right? So when the number of URM folks that stay is at least equivalent, if not higher, than non-URM folks, that tells me that we have a good culture. Problems happen everywhere. We live in America, right? There's bias everywhere. There's overt racism in pretty much anywhere you're going to turn. But how does the program stand up, and how does the institution stand up for doing the right thing? Those are really, really important for me. So I would encourage everybody, I put something in the chat about, no matter what your interests are, when they ask you, is there anyone you want to meet on your interview day, you should have an answer. Even if you don't have it right away, you can always contact the program coordinator again. But particularly for URM folks, I would ask to speak to other URM folks in the program and outside of the program. So ask, is there, vice chair for DEI? Is there health equity lead physician? That's somebody I want to talk to about understanding those support structures. I'd also ask every single interviewer these kinds of questions, because if you get the sense that most folks in the program don't have any of the answers to this and they kind of bring out their DEI person, that's a little bit concerning to me, right? This is everyone's job. And I could go on for another hour, so I'll stop there, but feel free to email me if you have more questions.
Thank you, everyone, for answering these questions. I'll turn it to Lauren now for our last rapid fire question, and then we will close.
Okay, so we just wanted to open up this last question for all of our program directors. What was the most helpful advice you received while applying to NICU fellowship?
I'll go first and get it out of the way. I cheated. I fast tracked into neonatology. So the most important advice I got was don't bomb the in-training exam, because that was one of the criteria to get in, and they had already matched me. So if I hadn't gotten a high enough score, they would have been out of fellow. Sorry, that's not useful to anyone.
I give the advice because I didn't get the advice to pay attention to how the fellows feel about their program director. And there were a couple specific programs that I still remember their interview day, both the lunch, which you guys don't get, and that kind of interaction amongst the fellows, and then what they said about their program director, which is like, I am here because I feel supported by this person. It was, I thought, one of the most important things looking back.
Dr. Greenberg, did you want to go next?
Sure, I'm trying to come up with something something good, something that was good for me personally, that may or may not be, I think for you the converse can be just as true. But when I was looking around at fellowships, I was very geography was very important to me, and I wasn't sure what to prioritize, and someone told me that where you go to fellowship doesn't have to be like the final decision of your life. So get your training at a place that's going to help you the most to get you to where your goals are, and then you can always, then you'll have the most options, ideally, if you've been happy with your training, and then you can get that position that is ideal for you. I think conversely, for some people, the best thing for them is to consider the geography and consider what's best for their life and their life situation at that point, and it's okay to do that and prioritize that. But just if you fall on one spectrum or the other, just maybe kind of considering that other piece of it. And for me, it was really helpful to realize, okay, I'm making a decision for 3 years. It ended up being a decision where I just stayed where I was for kind of the rest of my life. So it worked out well for me, but it's not always it's not always the case.
So I fast tracked too. My boss at the time was Dr. Bankalari, and he said to me at the time, where else are you going to get balance? You're going to get good clinical training, you're going to get good research training. But honestly, the most important thing for me was that I saw a solid set of mentors. So if you see people there who you feel can be good mentors for you, they're good role models, and they're happy, that's perhaps a place I'd like to be. So he told me that, but that was really why I stayed on.
And then Dr. Otrowski, did you go already?
I didn't. My situation was a little bit unique as well. I was before the match, and I was actually trying to convince myself I didn't want to do neonatology, and I was going to go be something else. And the advice that was given to me was to look deep inside and listen to your heart and listen to your gut. And when your head tries to tell you something else, you've got to really listen to who you are. So that kind of got me out of my head and guided me in the direction I was supposed to be in.
Well, with that, we wanted to thank all of our panelists for clearly demonstrating to us that, you're friends in real life, and you've given us a lot of very authentic, sage advice during this session. I truly feel so. Really appreciate your time, and we appreciate all the time of all of the participants who joined today. As Dr. French mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is also recorded, and it'll be housed on the AAP TCAN website for viewing ability, for years to come, hopefully. I just wanted to close with a couple of pieces of information. So there is a virtual cafe coming up through the AAP TCAN group, particularly focusing on these ERAS changes, where applicants and participants can continue to ask similar questions to what we addressed today and others. And so the Zoom link is both in the chat as well as on the screen here. And like we mentioned, we're hoping to do several other webinars during this application cycle as well. If any participants would like to join the Future Neos Now listserv, just email futureneosnow@gmail.com, and that's in the chat as well. And that'll include you into the medical student and resident group, and make sure you're up to date on all information. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. We want y'all to be successful, so reach out if we can do anything to help.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thanks for organizing, y'all, and always good to see you all. Can't wait. October, NCE, come on.
I know.
Where are we going this year? I
Me
take
too.
DC, right?
DC.
Again.
Okay, let's do it.
Well, hopefully, Liz, you'll come. We had the most fun in NC dinner. It was ridiculous. So hopefully we'll have to set something up similarly. It was really, really fun.
I feel like there were some bizarre stories out of PAS, some sort of strange phobia. What was it?
Megan has
Pandas.
despises pandas for whatever reason. We don't
They're
understand it.
so cute. What a hater.
It's her birthday this weekend, and Lindsay and I just sent her a stuffed panda for her 40th.
Yes, you were just right there. Just exactly what I had in mind. And like maybe some t-shirts. Like we can really do this up. You can edit this part out of the video when you put it online.
Oh shoot, you stopped the video.